So this one sat on the shelf for months. Not because it wasn't good, but because it hit too close to home. Ron Shell left the sports betting world and decided to build a pro pickleball league from scratch in Australia, just as MLP and PPA were expanding globally. He could have backed off, but he didn't. He leaned into the culture, designed new match formats, built premium indoor venues, and most importantly, he played the long game. This episode is a lesson in timing, intuition, and building what doesn't exist yet. There's a reason we waited to release this one, and you're about to hear why. Enjoy. Was there ever a moment building the MPL where you thought that this might not work?
Yeah, great question. I think if for anyone that starts anything new and embarks on the bold journey of trying to create something from scratch, there are moments every day where you think it's not going to work. Let alone one particular moment. I think the probably the key moment. I didn't necessarily feel this, but certainly there might have been a sentiment back a couple of years ago, pretty much at the same time that we announced we were going to run a professional teams league in Australia. The PPA and MLP announced they were entering Australia, almost at exactly the same time. And if you look at that from a non-biased outsider's opinion, that is in the pickleball world, even though it was very small at the time and still is, it's growing quickly here in Australia. They'd be like, oh well, that's done and dusted. The PPA and MLP, they're going to make a big Australian splash here. There's no point even trying to compete against that. And certainly we had to have those conversations internally. I think, that's probably the closest it got to, hey, is this, even worth it, even though we've already been operating for 6 months and we have other aspirations, whether it's property, whether it's marketing and brand in general. But I think what was really clear then and still is clear is that at that time, unless you were playing pickleball every day, which was a very small portion, no one knows or knew about either company. No one's following. The sport is so new, and we forget that sometimes, even in the US where it's just gone so quickly. It's still 5 really years old. Like the first 60 years, no one really knew about the sport. And so in 5 years, it's such a small period of time for there to be history and I guess awareness properly around the world. And so our vision was, hey, well, no pickleball player or company or individual knows either brand. Why, who can market the sport better and who can operate better. To us, that's going to be who can win long-term in the space. So, yeah, I think, look, you have incredible ups and downs as you try to build both a company and an industry at the same time. It's a really difficult thing to do because a lot of the things you do to build an industry don't exactly impact the company or deliver revenue, straight up. So you need to find that right balance and understand that other people see the same commercial opportunity. And other people are going to come in with venues, with leagues, with brands, with companies. There's going to be Asia, there's going to be America. How do you stick the course and, make realistic, I guess, decisions along the way to be like, hey, do we really have a shot here to do what we're aiming to do? And if the answer is yes, let's continue. So, yeah, I think it's a perpetual question you ask yourself, but that was probably that moment where it was like, do we keep going or do we not? And it was pretty early in the journey.
So for anybody listening, because I think there's been a lot of buzz recently in the US, especially about a lot of the Australian players that have came over and proven that they can compete and vice versa. The American players going over there and losing to a lot of the Australian players. So with that being said, for anybody listening that's not familiar with the NPL and what they're doing, can you tell us really what the NPL is?
Absolutely. So the NPL, we consider ourselves the premier pickleball organisation in Australia. We have 3 main pillars of our organisation. There is the Pro Tour, which is very similar to the PPA, MLP, APP, which people will know in the US, where we run a teams league that we call the NPL, and it runs in 3 of the states in Australia right now where pickleball is played the most, with 18 teams that compete for one final big prize. And then there's our tournament tour as well, where we run 6 major tournaments throughout various major cities in Australia. So both of them sit under the NPL banner. We don't have like a separate brand for teams and we separate brand for tournaments. They're both MPL. That's one part of our business. The second part, we were the first pickleball business to open an indoor center in Australia. And we call that the JAR Pickleball Club, the home of pickles. And we've expanded now to Sydney, and we're looking to expand that all over the country as well, hoping to have up to 8 venues over the next 2 years. We see them as premium pickleball venues that are also event spaces because what we've identified, and I guess is the third pillar of the business, is that marketing, events, activations is actually a really cool part of pickleball because it appeals to so many people. You can partner with so many different companies. You can partner with so many different major events. And that's a huge part of our business, creating that content, running those events and activations, and growing the sport, which links back to participation of our properties. And eventually that whole pool of people to be watching the Pro Tour as it progresses in Australia. So we sort of span across all the different elements of pickleball. And to summarize it, Alec, I'd say we're trying to build not the number one league, but the number one brand in pickleball in Australia. And therefore that can cover all of those different pillars.
So break that down for us a little bit. And the reason I ask you the question is because anybody that goes and looks at your guys' social media can tell the amount of work that you guys are currently putting into it. From an actual video editing and graphic design standpoint to the actual storytelling that you're doing within it. So there is definitely a lot of people that are putting time and effort into the way that you guys are organizing social media. So break us down a little bit more of why that's such a key pillar to the MPL.
Yeah, fantastic question. And it really is the core of what I think what our strengths are as a business, that marketing and content. And there's a great team there. I'd like to give a massive shout out to our head of brand, especially. His name's Eben Storty. We call him the wizard internally. He's just, you have those types of people which they operate on a different creative wavelength. And I've been lucky enough to work with him for 9 years across two industries now. But to break it down to its core, what we saw in Australia when we entered the market and what we saw in America in 2020 when pickleball started to gain popularity around COVID time was that there was an image problem with the sport. Previously, it was only played by an older generation, largely in retirement homes or multi-sport surfaces or venues. What I think changed in the US based on my research was that it started to just be marketed better and there were more dedicated venues that looked more appealing to play at. And you combine those two things into the types of content that was produced, and suddenly the US was able to attract a much younger generation to the sport, despite for 50 plus years, the average age being closer to 60 years old, playing pickleball. And they still love it, but we now brought that younger generation. So we looked at it in the same way. We go, hey, what worked in the US? Can we do it in Australia? And can we modernize the sport? That's what we spoke about, modernizing the image of the sport. And then who is going to be the target customer that allows us to spread the sport the quickest? I think what a lot of people fall into the trap of is if we run more pickleball tournaments and do more pickleball programs, the sport's going to skyrocket. That grows the sport on a very gradual level, in our opinion. What actually grows the sport is how do you infiltrate the mass media and the media that sits on social media, shares their stories on Instagram, TikTok, etc. To do that, they need to be proud of what they're sharing. And they're not going to be proud if they're in a multi-surface facility and it's dark and it's grainy. But if you create content that looks premium, that looks more like tennis, and I know paddle, I think, has done a really good job of making a premium sport from day one, then you have that 25 to 40 millennial demographic that has grown up, sharing their life on social media. They will jump in and share their pickleball experiences. And so our aim is how do we create a venue, an event, a brand where a 30-year-old woman comes in and wants to take a photo and share it. To be honest, that's the simplification of the MPL brand is if a girl in that target market feels very comfortable sharing the brand of MPL, she will share that to her audience. That means we will attract her male and female audience as well. And to do that, the content has to be at that high level. It has to be at the same level that they're sharing from their favorite athletics, merchandise companies, from their favorite drink water bottles, from their favorite fashion brands. if it's not to that same level, they don't want to be associated with it. So to that point, we've invested so much time and effort in in-house content, brand marketing, and doing it to that level that we believe, people will be proud to be a part of, without, Alec, losing this inclusiveness aspect. And I think that's been the hardest balance. Is if you think about every premium brand in the world, they actually try to be for a small group of people, or a smallish. And then if you think about inclusive, bigger brands, they're much more for the common denominator. We're trying to create a brand that people feel like is premium, but is still open to every age and every demographic. And I guess that's the beauty of pickleball, is we've never had something that unique as a vehicle. How do you straddle the line of premium, but for everyone? So it's a country club feel, except you don't need to get a membership to be a part of it. And creating that content, like I said, we've got a great team led by Eben, is the reason why we've invested so much into it, and really curating that journey so that when people decide, hey, I might try this sport now, I've seen it enough on my reality TV, I've been listening to the Fail First podcast, I heard my friends talk about it, I go and check NPL, oh, this looks cool, I'll go and do it. As opposed to, they might check pickleball, they might search it, and they find an image that doesn't really resonate with the rest of their lifestyle, and it doesn't convince them to jump into the sport. So that's probably a bit of the background behind the psyche of the marketing strategy.
Huh. So I have a question for you in there while I was thinking and my wheels were turning. Because the marketing piece is really the execution part. But if we're talking about the foundational piece here, you talked to us about going through the process of establishing who your key audience is. And I think that this is something even I overlooked when I first started the podcast, was like, who am I speaking to, right? Who is the people that we want to attract? So what was that process that you went through to understand who the actual target market was for the NPL before releasing the content series that you guys have done with NPL?
Great question. So I think the first step we did was actually, we started to release content, but certainly not at the level that it was, is we started to run smaller, I guess, events in our hometown to really just gather information. So one of the very first things we did was actually a learn to play day in a brewery here in Melbourne, Australia. And the reason we chose this brewery is because it had a decent spread of demographic, younger families, but it has that activities and fun. They do food trucks and things like that. And so we're like, hey, let's see if this type of market actually enjoys the sport and gets around it. Then from there, we were like, great, that went really well, but we need to validate that people actually want to play this sport long-term, and which types of people follow up from those types of events. So we went and ran a social league, we called it, which was a 6-week competition. And we ran it at a high school that allowed us to rent out the gym, once again with the multi-line, so not perfect, on a Sunday. And we started to see that, hey, there was I guess a market here, not just for the demographics we knew, let's call it the older demographic, but younger people, especially who had played other sports growing up, but potentially weren't in the position from a life or a body injury fitness point of view to continue playing them at the level that they want. They're still looking for something social and fitness based. And in Australia, we are a very fit and sport-based country. So we started to sort of mold that, hey, we are starting to see that 25 to 35-year-old who's looking for that extra activity that they're missing in their life. And that also ties in with who is sitting on the types of marketing that we think we can excel at. So it was testing out really through just actually running events, speaking to people. And then the one thing we noticed, Alec, is we ran a really great social league, as I said, but because it was run in an old school auditorium, there's basketball there, there's netball there, the photos and videos that we captured from that event, they didn't really make the sport look as fun as the fun that was being had. And we realized that, hey, yeah, while some of the people were starting to share our content, for the most part, people were turning up and having a good time, but they weren't necessarily sharing at that next level to their communities. So we've now got our target market roughly, and we've now got a problem where, hey, the content we've served just far is not good enough for them to feel like, hey, this can really be something I want all my friends and family to know that I'm doing. So we need to solve for that. So funnily enough, what that changed into was when we first raised money, as we're a private company, and as the National Pickleball League, you'd think, hey, you're raising all that money to go towards your professional tour. Instead, we raised that money to actually go towards finding a venue that we could purpose build. Because what we realized, the venue solves so many things. It doesn't only solve the fact that it allows somewhere to people to play our social leagues or our tournaments or whatnot. But it actually, if you build it in the way that we wanted to build it, it becomes a place where you can shoot the type of content and marketing that we want. And you can appeal to the types of brands who want to be involved, in something new and exciting. And so the venue became much more than just, hey, it can bring in, we think it can be successful. We think pickleball is going to grow. We think it can be a revenue driver. It became sort of a pillar for everything we stand for at the NPL. And so we made the walls green and everything was green and white, and we built a beautiful pro shop, and we didn't fit the courts in really, really tight, so that it became a premium space from day one, which links to the type of customer we're trying to target, which is that, let's call it the 25 to 40, but 25 to 35, looking for another activity, coming out of COVID, still needing that social aspect, wanting something that's not too hard, but is fun and a bit, can be competitive, can be just social. And we needed to give them a place to do that, which didn't feel like a really dark indoor sports center where you come and go just for your 1 hour booking. So yeah, I guess it led from testing out at certain places, realizing some of the gaps we had, and then changing our philosophy from, hey, let's push all the money into tournaments. Let's still run those tournaments, but let's actually start to create a base and validate if this venue works, the sport can really work in Australia. And that was a decision that was made, almost 2 years ago to the day now.
Was there a reason that you chose green and white and the aesthetic that you did? Was it trying to give that country club feel? Like, was there a purpose behind that branding?
Yes, and I'll speak on behalf of myself and once again our head of brand. But he actually did a lot of research into colors in general, and the green was chosen purely because of the psychological positive impact that it has. Whether it's greenery, plants, shrubbery, all the green you see in everyday life that you may or may not notice, it's an overwhelming positive color, and the studies show that it is, really positive connotations. And so I guess that, as well, with being able to be paired easily with some other colors. And I'll give an example. The previous company we both worked on was red and black. And red and black, it was powerful, and the connotations are certainly more premium with those colors, but they're very hard to match with others. And once again, we were trying to build a brand for sort of everyone and this inclusive sport. And we valued, I guess, that positivity first. And then it can be paired very well with white, gray, and even black when required, if we're trying to go down that more premium angle. And so that's where, I guess, the green and the NPL green sort of came from. Now, it's evolved slightly for the jar, which is our property arm, that it's a bit of a darker green rather than that lighter NPL green, because we're trying to create those premium venues. But overall, I think we really want to associate the sport with the color green, and therefore get that brand association with NPL as well. And I'll give one example. Tennis in Australia about 20 years ago decided every court was going to be this dark blue, which is very similar around the world. But it suddenly it built this brand association with tennis that as soon as you saw that dark blue, you immediately knew it was a tennis court, and it might be related to Tennis Australia. In a way, we are trying to do the exact same thing. And it's funny, like, people will see a green court in Austin, Texas, or in random parts of the US or Canada or everywhere, and they'll send us a photo now going, is this one of your courts? And it's not. But that's exactly what I want to build. What we want to build is, hey, you saw green, you've associated green with pickleball, and you've associated with NPL. So the positive connotations, and then being able to own that color was the background to those decisions.
I really wanted to dive into that because for any entrepreneurs listening, I think even skipping a not a failure. I won't call it a failure that I had, but a process of that you overlook the impact of the physical colors that can be had if it's in your logo, also the fonts associated to it. So a teaser that I'll put in here, I don't know when this is going to be released, but we're taking our logo and we've rebranded it to add emotion to it, right? Right now it's although the colors draw that, a lot of it doesn't really draw any emotion out of the audience. It's more of a corporate vibe. For us, we want to connect with our audience a little bit more. We want to have that emotional tie to it, whether it's that fearlessness, etc. So I've gone through the same process, kind of like, hey, there's a point where you take action, or you just do it.
Yeah.
And there's a point where like,
Yep.
okay, let's put some more thought into this, right? To actually grow moving forward. So I really
When,
wanted to key on that here.
when's that release coming?
For us, so what we're doing behind the scenes is we're building really a bunch of apparel is what we're doing. And not to get too detailed for anybody out there, but we're trying to find a way to build apparel that actually calms your central nervous system. So aligning with our mental performance leg, we want to try and find a way to literally take your heart rate and reduce it going into a match, whether it's pickleball, tennis, etc., and actually give you physical benefits from our clothing.
Wow.
So think of it realistically like a weighted blanket does the same thing.
Yeah.
But how can we take that concept and make it to a point where you're actually able to move in it, right? You can't be running around with a 20-pound blanket on. So we've gone through some betas already. We're along the way, and we're going to launch that as partnered with our brand. But when we get off air, I'll send you a copy of it so you can
Love
take a
it.
look at it, and I appreciate your feedback.
Yeah, fantastic.
So I have a question for you kind of moving forward here, and that is, how did you end up recruiting players and creating this structure when you had MLP and PPA moving in at the same time? Like, how did you go about talking to players and saying, hey, we're building this league, NPL. It's unfortunate that it launched at the same time, but here's the opportunity that you could have on over here. How did you go about actually recruiting players to play?
Yeah, it was a very interesting time, and still is. You know, we're still competing in the same market. Although I think the very key thing is that we made sure we needed to really differentiate the products. If we're going to offer the exact same thing, it's going to be hard to compete head to head if they're offering more prize money and whatnot. So really we stripped it back and we go, okay, what do we want to build and how do we want to sell that? You know, which is the question you're asking. And so there was probably two very key points. First is that we wanted to build something that was built for Australian sports. And we really wanted to focus on that we are an Australian league for Australian players. And the reason for that is that, I mean, like any country, countries love their local things. You know, there is that pride, but every country does sport in a different way. And we, being sports fanatics ourselves, I've loved all sports growing up, knew, you know, the type of way that Australians, I guess, you know, they integrate, they connect with sports. It is a bit different to the US and it's a bit different to other places. And so with that in mind, we wanted to build our teams league, which is our pinnacle, to be something that was very more similar to what people are used to from an Australian perspective. And that meant that it had a very clear regular season that led into a final series, as opposed to being more one-off events, which was, you know, very typical of the MLP and PPA format. So that was probably the first point. We wanted that, hey, that's what we're used to here with the Australian Football League, with Rugby League, is working in that same sphere. And then I guess secondly is, you know, trying to let players know what our vision is of the sport. We can say, hey, you can play in either league. They're great, both great companies. What we're trying to do long term, however, is we're trying to grow the sport so that the mainstream media and mainstream person gets interested in the sport as quickly as possible. Otherwise, it's going to be a very, very long journey to try crack through the existing sporting Australian landscape. And so we, I guess, sold what we talked about earlier in the podcast around our content and marketing strategy, that, hey, we want to get this sport in front of not just pickleball players, but non-pickleball players. We want to get in front of non-pickleball companies. We want to create athletes and personalities through the journey. That's not going to happen overnight. and it's not going to happen, next week, but that is the vision. And if you stick with us, that's what we're trying to grow. And so there was that marketing element and there was that Australian element. That were the two big differentiators. And then we added a third one, which is, hey, we believe long-term that singles and not doubles is actually the more watchable sport for the casual sports fan. And the reason I say that,
Interesting.
yeah,
Hot take.
yeah, we still strongly believe that. And I think what I would say to that is that to enjoy doubles fully, even from a professional level, you need to have played the sport and played doubles at least a few times so you can understand the nuances of the sport. Otherwise, it can look, I'm not saying it is, but it can look as very repetitive. Singles has that same singles feel to tennis in a way where there's athletic plays, there's big points every few points, and that sort of, there's that excitement that comes with it that's easier to sell to someone who doesn't know much about pickleball. That's at least our theory. And so we created a product from day one that actually had 50% singles, 50% doubles. So it was different to the MLP format that they were deciding, whether they compete with MLP or whether they compete with MPL. So now you've
Describe
got
that for us.
Yeah.
For our listeners to
Yeah,
give them a
so
better
I'll
understanding how
describe
the
it. We
format is.
call it the NP League format, so National Pickleball League, but NP League. And essentially, there are now 4 players in the team, so similarities there, 2 male, 2 female. But the first leg is either female singles or male singles. It swaps over, and each of the players play. Let's say it's female singles to begin. They play first to 11, win by 2. If you win both of your singles as a team, you get 1 point for that set. If you split them, so one team wins one of the singles, the other team wins the other, then it's 0.5 points each. There are 4 total sets I'm about to work through, and if the sets are even at the end, there's a deal breaker, which we call, which is that final decision maker. So first set, female singles. Second set, gender doubles, and it starts with female doubles playing to 11. And then whoever reaches 11 first, we actually swap the players over and the male players come in and they play first to 22. So we've created this unique format where both players, all players play, and it's essentially first to 22, but you switch the genders at whoever reaches 11 first. And then that's gender double. So whoever wins that gets first to 22, they get 1 point as a set. Then you move on to the next set, which is male singles, which is the same as female singles. If you win both of your male singles, you get 1 point. If you only win one, you get 0.5. And then the fourth set is mixed doubles. So very similar to the gender doubles. One pair starts, and whoever reaches 11 first, the next pairs come in, and they play until 22. And at the end of those 4 sets, if it's even in set scores, let's say it's 2-2 it then moves to a deal breaker, which is first to 21 rally scoring, and it changes every 5. So it's all the different combinations, whether it's singles, gender doubles, mixed doubles, changing every 5 points until one of the team reaches 21. And then you've got a winner of that match. I guess the beauty of the format is in the doubles, you can see really big comebacks. For example, a team could be leading 11-1, and then you switch over to the next mixed doubles pairing. They could theoretically come back and win 22-11 if they win 21 points in a row. So you see some really big swings. And then with this, you get the best of both worlds. You do watch some really good singles. You do watch some really good doubles, and you mix it up. So once you play singles, it moves to doubles, then it moves back to singles, then it moves to doubles. And then if there's a tiebreaker at the end called our deal breaker, you play a combination of both. And so for us, we've been tinkering with that. There's been different changes to that format slightly. That's the current format, but it works really well. The games finish in about 2 to 2.5 hours, which we believe is a really good time, even from a broadcast point of view. And you get to see the best of singles, doubles, and mixed doubles as well. So that's our format we created. And going back to the original question, I think, we had Australia, we had our marketing, and then we had the format. And at the time, we probably split. A lot of the good players still went and played PPA, MLP. A lot of them came to us. And I guess as time progressed, they continue to see that we are offering this really Australian-focused product. And what is key for that is we have 72 players playing this year. 65 of them are Australian. As an example, MLP have 48 players, but 12 of them are Australian. So we've really infiltrated and built that Australian product. We've then shown how good we are at the marketing and content side of things. Got nearly 20,000 social media followers. We do content creators on the day. There's previews, there's reviews. There's a lot of fun ambassador content. And I think people have really bought into that. And there's still a great respect, for both organizations. But for those that believe in what we're trying to do, they've really seen the differences. And it does mean that we have had a bit of a younger demographic because of the singles focus, and it has brought in a lot of tennis players.
I haven't thought of that. Okay.
Yeah. So, our leagues, obviously you need to be good at singles and doubles. So it does start to rule out some of the people who might be doubles specialists. And what it does, it has helped us convince a lot of really strong junior or former junior tennis players to come and try the sport, because as we've seen in the US, tennis players convert very easily to singles. They take a bit longer for doubles. And so our league, it sort of allows them to grow into that, through both formats and a season-long schedule.
I think what's so unique about that format, which I actually love, is it's a true team format. What I mean by true is the fact that when it comes to gender doubles, you have 4 people that are competing for a total score. And then when it comes to mixed doubles, you have the same thing. You have 4 people competing for a total score, which is more of a true team format than I would say is MLP. And the only reason I'm getting at that is because you kind of have the prime example, which is what the Ben John situation currently is over in MLP.
Yeah.
Right? He's definitely the best player in the world on both sides of the ball, with singles and doubles, and from an IQ standpoint. However, his team has drastically struggled in MLP because one guy can't win the game.
Yeah.
Right? And so when it comes to a true team format on the other side of the fence, what you're talking about is like you have to build a very true, robust team, or else you're going to have a team that just gets the brains beat in, and therefore they're way out of it. So I really like that format. I'd be interested in playing with it myself. A question that I had that you finished with, which is the broadcasting piece, is I'm sure you've seen this difference between watching the game in person and the energy that is created around it versus watching it over a broadcaster on TV. There's some gap there right now. When you think about the mass amount of people that are playing, I'll give the US numbers because I'm familiar with them. They estimated between, I think it was 35 and 45 million last year playing in the US. But you go on to, let's say it's a YouTube live stream, or let's say over in the US, it's Pickleball TV that people are watching now. There's maybe a couple thousand to 15,000 to 20,000 viewing at a time. So there is a massive gap to the actual series. The other gap that proves it is when it's been on ESPN or CBS Sports on a prime time, whether it's like noon to 2, it's crushed. So like, what's the gap between? And have you guys had those internal discussions of like, how do we bring the viewership, the audience watching at home actually closer to the game to feel this energy? And like, what are you trying to do about it?
Yeah, this is the $1 billion question. It's not even $1 million question, because I think we all agree, and everyone has now seen enough proof points that there is probably much less discourse around pickleball being a fad that's going to go away. I think nearly every person, even people who were skeptical to begin, have now been convinced that this sport is here from a participation standpoint. What you're talking about is probably the biggest frontier that still hasn't been solved. And certainly we're trying, and I'll touch on how, but it still has not been solved. This gap between participation to viewing is a serious one, because most professional sports make the majority of their money from streaming rights and those types of deals, and commercial partnerships and brand sponsorships. They value very highly the broadcast because so many people are watching it. When you lose that, you lose a huge part of an industry, for now at least. And certainly, there's still been growth in the last few years, but it hasn't reached the levels we want it to reach. I think this is where we're trying to innovate, and we certainly haven't solved it yet, but we're certainly getting closer. I think we go back, that one part of it is that singles element, in that how do you integrate singles more, because that has more of a chance, we think, to be that eye-catching point. I think the second one is trying to separate the love of the game with the commercialization from a mainstream fan part of the game. And what I mean by that is that we can think that pickleball is the greatest sport and it's amazing to play and the tournaments are incredible in person, but we need to take that hat off and work out what is actually going to be the best long-term product that does get that number from 20,000 that you're talking about in America to 1 million. Yeah. 1 million people viewing the sport when there's a big event on. And for us, where we've tried to play around with that is that we think that potentially pickleball doesn't have that same ability like tennis to maybe keep someone engaged for 3 or 4 hours on the same match. That's okay, because it is such an amazing participation sport. It can be maybe the biggest in the world one day behind soccer. Who knows? So knowing that, how do you then still get people engaged? And so what we've tried to, I guess, create and experiment with and see where that goes is this concept of, we call it green zone. It's very similar to the NFL red zone, but it's the concept of trying to bring in the best of what's happening in multiple games around the country.
Is this with Ash Williams?
It is with Ash Williams, yeah. And so,
we'll get into him.
This is, he's a very funny man. He's our NPL Pro Tour commentator officially with Dylan Kimlin as well, who's big in the commentary scene in Australia. I was the first one there. The key behind it is we've got 9 matches happening, 3 in Brisbane, 3 in Sydney, 3 in Melbourne at the same time. No one's doing this in the world. How do we bring the best parts of each match and the best players? So, people do want to watch Ben Johns and Federico and, all those types of players, Jack Sock, Hunter Johnson, playing singles. So when they play, bring that onto the screen. People do want to watch close matches when it's close in our format, when it's 2020. People want to see what happens because it's higher drama. When there's storylines, like these two players hate each other, or this was a really close match last time, people want to watch it. When the pickleball is of the highest quality, the dink rallies are going for 100 shots, or there's just incredible athletic plays, people want to watch it. So can we just take the best parts of what's happening and create this one product that then is what the casual sports fan really enjoys? Now, we've started to do that. We've certainly increased viewership, but it's still not, at the levels we want it to get to, which we're going to keep working on. And we're only, a season in of even trying that type of product. But that's how we're trying to think, Alec, is we've got to stop being, I think people are very proud in the pickleball world and like, no, this is a great sport. Everyone's going to love it. Like, take that hat off and be like, well, that's not true, because we've seen that only 5, 10, 15,000 people are watching. So don't just force feed the same thing. Try and think, okay, cool. Well, I am competing against the NFL. I am competing against the NBA. I am competing against sports that have been around for 50 to 100 years or more. We've only been around for X amount of years. It's going to be a really long journey, but how do we keep modifying the product so that if I'm switching channels between one of my favorite shows and I suddenly come onto pickleball and I decide, you know what, I will give this 5 minutes of my time, there's a product there that is exciting enough to keep them for the next 5 or 30 minutes of their time. So I think that's how we're looking at it. We've created a really innovative product. There's some interest in Asia already to stream that product. I think there still needs to be constant refinements, improvements, and then more reasons probably for people to watch the broadcast and get that energy. Like you said, it sort of doesn't come through when you're watching any broadcast that there is a great energy in the stadium. And I do think that there still needs to be some people who are experts in the broadcast and media area who put their stamp on it and be like, cool, well, let's do more of this, or let's try this. And then we continue to iterate. And instead of trying to solve it for next year, we're trying to solve it knowing that, hey, we might change this 10 times over the next 3 years. But there's a journey here, and that the pro space and the broadcast space, it's actually really, really hard to break through. So let's not, just because so many people are playing it, let's not assume that it's just going to be one for one. Let's assume the participation journey is much easier. and the broadcast and media journey is a bit harder.
I think that is a tremendous breakdown, because I think even myself, right, having these podcasts, I've had people that have like messaged me and asked some questions after an episode, and it's because you get so caught in the weeds of being in the space, you aren't able to have that bird's eye view all the time. So I think you're spot on with that. What I think is super interesting about the green zone that you talked about is if reference to like red zone. It's like if they cannot capture, and for anybody listening that doesn't know red zone, like it's the NFL's way of being able to look at multiple games at one time.
Yep.
And it's because there's a lot of dead between a given football match. There's a lot of downtime. So that is a super cool, unique way to go about actually capturing people's attention consistently throughout multiple pickleball matches that are occurring at the same time. And to your point, when I'm watching, let's say it's PPA or MLP or APP, one of them, let's say it's on YouTube, sometimes the game that I want to watch isn't even streamed and I can't find it, right? So there's also, if people are coming for Jack Sock, let's say from tennis, people are coming to watch Jack Sock and then they can't find Jack Sock on the stream, they're going to leave.
Yeah, they'll give
right?
up quickly. Yep.
They'll give up. They won't stay. So I think that's a tremendous point there. Interesting. I'm really curious on how.
But watch
how
this
you guys went
space,
about
Alec.
targeting
Like
that.
it's once again, I don't think anyone's going to solve it right now, but I think what needs to be is an open mind, as you said, to remove yourself from the weeds and be like, hey, actually, if I completely removed myself from pickleball, how am I, going to find interest in what we're showing? And it might be that you need to find the player that you want, or it might be that you need to see a bit more excitement. I think another thing that really lacks in pickleball broadcasts is statistics.
I agree.
Like even, the PPA is ahead of most organizations from the US. Like the statistics are very basic. They don't build really any storylines you're super interested in. And I think that's going to improve, but I think that needs to be a focus. We're in a high-tech modern world with low attention spans.
Yep.
And if you take that into account, what is going to keep it? Well, cool graphs, exciting moments, things like that will keep people there. So how do you bring more and more of those to the fore? And of course, the best players and best personalities, and the biggest stars. And if you can't go on and watch them and you can't understand, how did Jack Sock go in his last few games and in the last tournament, and what are his strengths and weaknesses on the court, you might still lose interest, in 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, and it's so true. And there's this gap between like displaying the actual athleticism some of these players have. For my parents to sit down and watch it and be like, "Oh, I can do that." I'm like, "No, you can't. You cannot do that."
Yeah.
But they think that they can. Watching it doesn't entice them to want to continue watching. There's no wow factor, right?
Correct.
So like, "Oh, wow, that was impressive." And then it makes you sit down and want to watch more. So my other question would be, how would we end up pulling, and this could just be a brainstorm here,
Yep.
right? How are we pulling people closer to seeing the shape of that ball or understanding the spin manipulation that's being put on it, or even how outstretched a player actually gets, the flexibility of a player to be able to plant, slide, reach, and still hit the shot, right? You're not able to see that currently on a live stream. So like, how are we bringing people much, much closer to that action and that athleticism that's on display?
Yeah, great question. I've got a very simple answer. It's a bit of a cop out and a blanket answer, but it has to be
New camera angle.
Yeah, it has to be. No, it has to be AI. Like there is technology out there now for other sports that is just so far ahead of pickleball. And even if we had the most basic version of what those sports had 5 years ago, it would be an upgrade on what we have. What I think has happened, and we're part of that, is that people have seen, let's call it a commercial opportunity with pickleball here, and everything is moving at just this incredibly quick rate. We need to be the best sport and the number one sport in the world as quick as possible. The sport's going to grow anyway because it is such a great sport. All the reasons for it, accessibility, social, anyone can play. Those things are known, and as venues keep opening up, people will play the sport. What hasn't, what we haven't taken the time to do is exactly have a lot of these conversations around, how do you capture their athleticism? How do you tap into technology to, as opposed to just trying to sell? It's almost like pull back and be like, well, maybe we don't do, or we do the same broadcast we did for a year or two, but in the background, we're actually working towards a much longer term vision. And I think to that point, like I haven't even thought of that, but wouldn't that be amazing? Yeah, some of the reach, understanding the sports science behind it, understanding the spin on the ball, understanding the revs, understanding, comparing. And I think we shouldn't shame away from the fact that this is such an easy sport to pick up. But, if there were stats around, this is a pro and this would be the exact same stats that a regular person at your rec center would have. These are cool stats. No one's going to take offense to that. Like, that is, really interesting. Other sports have it easy because it is much easier to see it without needing to question it. Pickleball is on a tiny court as well. So there's that aspect. And then once again, it's easy enough to pick up. So it loses that ability that, tennis, really hard to pick up. And so people really appreciate when they're watching the Djokovic, Alcarazes and Sinners of the world. And we don't get that, which is the beauty of pickleball, is also the downside from a professional standpoint, is like, oh, I could have done that. Or that's not that impressive. Unlocking that, which you've alluded to, is probably the secret of the broadcast long term. So I think that's a really, really good point. And certainly one that already now my mind is ticking. We have ideas meetings every quarter. We want to be one of the most, if not the most innovative league or brand in the world. And these are the types of things that we think make the difference, not necessarily just running 100 tournaments in a year.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's a reason every other sport also has an off season, right? It allows the players to adapt, get better, build more strength, and come back with a better product. The question that I wanted to key in on, though, here with your sports betting background before we get to our closing questions is this type of data being captured what allows sports betting to come into the scene? Because that is a whole nother avenue of revenue that really propels the sport forward, is getting sports betting entities involved. Is it the data that needs to be collected in order for that foundation to be set?
Two things: data, and then I guess integrity, and making sure that that's set up in a way. I think sports betting has become, such a huge industry worldwide, and I guess integrity, around the whole concept of match fixing and all of these things needs to be really, really strong for betting to be allowed on it. And then data, as you've alluded to. I would say we have enough data for very basic sports betting, but not for what we'd want. And so we're definitely contributing to that. We're starting to capture a lot more data on our pro space, where we capture a lot more about individual points and things like that. It's still not enough from an individual level, let's say in doubles. And I think that needs to improve. To be able to, I think FanDuel already last year started offering this year, or just match head-to-head betting on some of the PPA events. In Australia, it's still got a while to go because we need to have the sport have more official framework, more official, integrity and other procedures set up, and then the data capture. However, I will say, as you've alluded to with my background, I get asked it all the time. I do think it's going to be a massive part of the sport. Why I think it's actually such a great betting sport. And here's another thing that might just save it. Like, maybe the broadcast doesn't need to improve. Maybe all you need is betting, because then people watch a sport. And that's honestly
That's true.
It's not a horrible way to look at it, because what I love about pickleball from a betting perspective, having worked in the betting industry over 10 years and dealing with customer and marketing and everything, is that games are quick, or at least in comparison to a lot of other sports. Bettors love that. There is a reason why table tennis became the most bet sport during COVID, not only because it was one of the only sports being played, but it was also the matches finished in like 5 minutes. And pickleball has this beautiful aspect of that it is like the individual games are actually relatively quick in the grand scheme of things. I think it can be an unbelievable betting sport. And not only that, you'll have as well, because so many people will end up playing it, that actually leads itself to them wanting to bet on it more, because they'll form opinions based on their actual real life experiences. So I do think in a few years it becomes a massive, massive part of the sport because the sport is suited to very consistent betting. I do think, however, like the few years is because unless it's set up to actually, deal with largely the framework and integrity that's needed in place, can start and fail very, very quickly. Because if you think about it, the reason those integrity issues exist is because players can earn more money through illegal activities than for that. And right now in pickleball, outside of the top 20 players in the world, you would then have every other
They
player.
kind of be like, why not? Right? I'd be
Why wouldn't
making
I
way more money.
engage in nefarious or illegal activity? And I'm not saying they would or wouldn't, but I'm just saying I live in the real world. And so we're not in a place yet. We need the sport to have been progressed with a lot more people earning a lot more of a professional livelihood to it, which is coming. And then betting can start to be a really big part of the sport. And potentially, if the broadcast issues we talk about haven't been solved by then, betting is the great equalizer to try solve those things.
So before we get into our closing questions, is there anything that we haven't discussed today that you may want to key in on or even let our audience know coming up for MLP or MLP and NPL?
No, look, I think we covered a lot of unique questions. I'd implore anyone listening to, please, we would love you to tune into our Green Zone. We have our league playing again this weekend. We then have our finals, which is the showcase product at the end of May. So if you're in the US, Canada, anywhere, and you want to be like, hey, I actually want to see what the standard is of Australian pickleball and what is this new format they're creating, May 30th, May 31st, June 1st. There's 3 days. 2 of the days is amazing final series. We'll be broadcasting every game. And you'll be able to see as well the brand and the event we're trying to build here in Australia. That I think we really see growing in Asia in particular. The US will be hard to crack into. I'm sure one day there'll be different partnerships we sort of do there, but Asia's right on our doorstep and there's so much growth there. So I do see the MPL brand expanding significantly outside of Australia. But yeah, I think if you really want to get a view of what Australia's like, the best players are all coming from all the different states at the end of this month. And it's an amazing opportunity to make your own opinions and give us some feedback.
What, in comparison, before I ask you the final couple questions, is how fast is Australian pickleball growing in comparison to Asia and I'll say even the European countries?
Great question. Look, I think Australia is a very great country. We are very slow in adoption of things, but pickleball is growing very quickly. We've gone from 20,000 to over 100,000 players in 2 years. And I think that will, the aim is to get to over 1 million players over the next 2 or 3 years.
What's the total population in Australia to give?
25 million approximately.
Okay. So it's about 300. I think it's over 300 million in the US, maybe 400.
So I always divide it by
comparison.
10 to make it really easy. So if you think, hey, that there's, 50 million players next year, maybe this year, that will play the sport in the US. If we can get to, even the US is adopted at a huge rate. If we can get to 2 million players, that is a really good comparison, a really good industry size. We've already gone ahead of squash and other sports that have been around for many years. So growing quickly, I'd say that the countries that are growing the quickest, no surprise, are like China. Vietnam has the most courts per capita in Asia, and Malaysia and Singapore right behind it. And then India, and China, just with their breadth of people, are going to grow pretty quickly. China's aiming to have 100 million players by 2032. Which, is crazy. If you think about it, badminton, they have 250 million players, and they do see this as a sport which the Chinese can really get behind and, own from an Olympics
250
perspective.
in badminton?
Yeah, crazy. I looked up the numbers
insane.
yesterday. Yeah, so we're talking about different worlds, which is why we want to build the number one Australian brand that can actually resonate all over the world, because we do see our marketing and our angle being something that can be really cool in other places. But yeah, Australia's just over 100,000 estimated participants. The journey for us is get that to 1 million first, and then a few million over the next few years. And I think we can get there, which will be an amazing rise for us in a very short period of time. And I think we're, one of the big catalysts behind that because of the amount of money we're investing in marketing in the space.
So I'm going to give you our closing questions here, which obviously has to be geared around some failures and some fears.
Yep.
So our first one is going to be, Ron, what is your greatest failure?
In life or with MPL?
It could be NPL or personal life related. Either one works, or both.
Great question. And I know you're going to ask. I was thinking about this. I mean, there's like, I'll start by saying the way I've lived my life is based on having as many failures as quick as possible. I think my parents say, you're the only person we know that needs to make every mistake once, at least, and sometimes twice. And I definitely adopt that from a business standpoint. I think probably the biggest failure I'd have, and I'll link it to MPL because we're talking about it, is really underestimating the probably the amount of money you need to be able to do anything. And I look back at our first raise. A lot of people have gone through this, but it's fascinating to go through it because you can budget and prepare things, but unless you're in a mature industry that has an incredible amount of statistics and data behind it, you have no idea. Like, your best guesses are at best going to be 50% correct. And then I guess you need to pull that back and have probably remove your ego a bit and be like, yeah, I might be really good at guessing. I might be really good at things, but I need to actually assume I have no idea, as opposed to that I have an idea. And that's how we need to raise and structure a company. And I think, like many new startups, we probably underestimated how much we needed to do X, Y, and Z, and what we needed, and other competitor, and all of these different things. That I think was the biggest learning for us, is that, hey, take what your best guess is and add almost 100% on top of that in terms of what could go wrong and how much cash or capital you need and what sort of team you need. If you do that, then you actually can build a buffer for success. Now, we've learned from that and have really structured the company for better success over another raise and other things. But it's a really fascinating thing to go through, because you put yourself under immense pressure as a startup owner when you don't factor in buffer. And that's because you think, hey, I'm smart enough to understand what's going to happen. I put in a tiny bit of buffer. No, you're not, because the world doesn't wait for you and only you to do things. So I guess, that's a very common thing, but it was a fascinating thing to go through. And from that standpoint, we probably didn't raise enough at all to open a venue, run a league, do all the marketing things. And what it did teach us on the plus side is an incredible way to efficiently use money. But on the negative side, you don't want to be spending all your time thinking about how we're going to get through month to month. Instead, if you're in a growth business, you want to be really smart with your spend, but also have enough there to be able to grow the business. So I think looking back and being critical, that was probably, a great failure, having been in startups before, but never actually needing to start them up as the main person. That's probably the biggest failure or learning I had during the MPL journey.
For our listeners, our entrepreneurs that may be dissecting that, or even people in their 9 to 5, what is the delicate balance between building too much of a buffer where you have analysis paralysis of just not taking any action and just really saying, fuck it, like, we have to start?
Yeah, I'm big in the fuck it, we have to start camp, and I really truly 100% believe in it. I think that the way we look at I think you have to break decisions or how you operate into phases of a business. I don't think there's a one size fits all approach. But let's call it the first 2 years of any startup I've been involved with. You need to get some data, and then you need to trust the smart people in your organization. And it almost is 30% data, 70% let's go. As you shift, that should increase the data, mainly because you have more data. So let's say the next 2 years where you go from being a startup to a small to medium company, it should be closer to me to at least 50-50. But still moving quickly and moving with, authority, I would value that, because you fast fail and fast learn, which is so much better than data. The ability to learn what works and what doesn't in real life situations, to me, will always be stronger. And it does, imply the data. And then as you get to a point where you are a larger company, I do think it needs to be closer to 70-30. So you flip those first 2 years. However, if you start to lose that ability to move quickly and act on ideas, there is someone sitting somewhere around the world that will take that opportunity ahead of you. And we've seen it from some of the biggest companies through to the smallest companies. What I'll say is that I've never regretted going out and failing, as long as you did it with the mindset that you can fail and not being hurt by that and not being paralyzed by a failure. Instead, being like, it didn't work. Great. We thought it would, or we thought it didn't. What do we learn from that? Let's move on. And if you go out with that mindset, and as long as you're quite communicative and you have a strong enough brand behind you, which we're building, you can cover for most failures. What you can't cover for is a better product and someone coming in before you and doing it better, which analysis paralysis will lead to.
So our second closing question is, what is your greatest fear moving forward?
My greatest fear is that, and I think it's for everything, is that I don't achieve the level of achievement that I want to in anything that I do in life. And it's not a fear of failure. It's a fear of setting high standards and not meeting them. And to be honest, my biggest fear is not for myself. My biggest fear is actually letting down team members and investors and those. And I say that in that nothing would give me more pride and more happiness than seeing everyone succeed together. I'm going to be okay. I can fail at things and get up the next day and really, really easily, maybe too easily. And so the fear for me is though that everyone is very different, and I've noticed that in team and things that we do. And I'm really passionate about sharing in things together. I don't think you can do things alone. I think if you find the right team, you can achieve incredible things. And so probably that fear I have is, can I live up to the expectations and the desires and the aims and the dreams and hopes of everyone around me? And that's probably something I've needed to learn to deal with more day to day, is that it's not actually my own stress. It's the perceived stress that I might feel from others, even if they're not putting it on myself. And so that's probably my greatest fear, is that I don't want to let those people down. I'm comfortable with letting myself down to an extent, but I'm not as comfortable with letting people I love, trust, or have worked with for a long time down. And I won't. But that certainly is something that hangs out there, and you can never guarantee anything. Knowing that you can't guarantee anything is just an always a little fear that sits there on the back, being like, I know I'm okay with that. And I know largely people are going to be okay with that because we've always done things the right way and there's nothing perfect in life. But having that sort of fear, it is motivating as it is just a constant fear that sits there on the side.
Boy, do I resonate with every piece of that. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So our final question, which is, when this is all said and done, right? You're inevitably approaching this chapter coming to a close of your life. A book is written, just like a shoe dog is written, just like there was one recently written about Elon Musk. And there's that final chapter in the book. What would you want that final chapter about Ron Shell to say?
It's a deep, deep question, Alec. I would want that final chapter. I think what's most important, what actually motivates me, is not money or any of the more traditional things. You need those things to achieve what I'm about to say. What motivates me the most and the happiest moments of my life is when you are laughing with the people that you are closest and dearest to you, and you have achieved things together. That achievement and that laughter and happiness, where you can just sit there on a porch and have a beer and just laugh about all the trials and tribulations that you went through. Like that to me is, the most defining thing that I search for. So in that final chapter, I would love it to say something like that. He achieved great things, which I'm very much want to do. But at the core of it, he just wanted to sit there and have a laugh with his friends, and that he never lost sight of the enjoyment that you can have in the smaller things in life. Because really, when I look back at every great memory that I've had in my life, they are just the simplest times when you are with people you love in amazing situations, and you're just crying in laughter over something, or you're reminiscing over just 10 years of incredible friendship. And I want to be in a position where I can do that more and more and work, potentially less and less. And so that last chapter is like achieved great things, but was able to laugh and enjoy the journey along the way. And I do think even at times here with MPL, there's been days, weeks, months where I've lost sight of that journey, and it's nowhere near as enjoyable. So great. Maybe I still achieve the things at the end, but was it worth it? I don't know. And I think if the final chapter talks about how enjoyable those little moments are along the way, and that really the final thing is actually just a final little moment as well. But really the whole thing was, what were those little moments that were just so enjoyable? And then in the end, as a body of work, it did look like something big was achieved. That would be a really pleasing final chapter.
Well, Ron, to me, it sounds like that is exactly the narrative that you are employing with the NPL. When it comes to the storytelling that you guys are doing between the players and the actual league itself, and wanting to truly grow the sport as a whole by getting as many eyeballs on it as possible and allowing people to connect through this sport that has touched us all, which is pickleball, it seems to me like that's exactly what you're doing. So I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today and sharing what the NPL is doing, what the buzz is all about over in Australia. And really, I'm super excited to see where the NPL goes, right? Beyond Australia, right? The Asian population is blowing up. Over in Europe, it's starting to catch fire. And I'm really excited to see how NPL ends up growing on that journey. It's super, super exciting. I think you guys have just done such a tremendous job at so many storylines. Like I was watching the one between Zach Grabovic and Joey Wild the other day, a little bit deeper on your page, and the stories that you're pushing towards there. Super excited for it. And having this conversation, anybody listening can understand the level of detail that you guys are putting into what you're doing over at MPL. So thank you for that.
Awesome. No, I appreciate it. These are incredible questions. It's nice to sometimes answer the questions that you probably just think about internally a lot. So no, I really appreciate it. You're doing a great job, Alec. I look forward to seeing the branding and the merchandise and staying in close contact and hopefully meeting one day.